Welcome to lesson 6, and we're going to talk about converting from decimal to fraction to percent. Hopefully you've already worked the sheet in your workbook. If you don't have a workbook and you'd like one, I'll put a link in the description below. Otherwise you can just follow along. Up at the top of the page, here are all the hints. You're only going to have There's only 6 possible types of problems, and that's what this means. Either you're trying to, if you have a decimal, you're trying to change it to a fraction or a percent. If you have a fraction, then you're trying to change it to either a decimal or a percent. And if you have a percent, you're only trying to go to decimal or fraction. Then I mentioned the difference between tenths and hundredths. That's decimal positions. If they tell you to round off to the nearest tenth, that's one number past the decimal. If you're told to round off to the nearest hundredth, that's 2 numbers past the decimal, like cents. If they say thousandths, then that would be 3 numbers past the decimal. So let's go ahead and start trying to fill in the chart. For the first one, they give you a decimal of 0.89. So how do you go from a decimal to a fraction? Well, you put your number on top, and you're going to put 1 with some zeros on the bottom. How many zeros? Well, you count how many numbers do you have to the right of the decimal. It doesn't matter how many are on the left of the decimal. It's only on the right. So to the right of this decimal, I have 2 numbers. So I'm going to put 2 zeros. That won't reduce down. So that is the fraction form of 0.89. All right, so how do we change this to a percent now? If you look at your hints, if you want to go from decimal to percent, you move your decimal 2 places to the right. So 1, 2, and that would be 89%. Okay, in the next problem, you have 4/5 as a fraction, and we want to convert it to a decimal and to a percent. So let's see. Fraction to decimal, you just divide. Now when you divide a fraction, the number on the bottom is your divisor, so that goes on the outside. How am I going to divide 5 into 4? Well, I need more numbers. So what you do is you add some decimal places. Since we're going to the nearest hundredth, I'm going to put 2 zeros. Okay. Put the decimal in the matching place up here. Now 5 won't go into 4, but it will go into 40. How many times? 8. Okay, and when you multiply 8 times 5, you get 40, no remainder, so that's as far as you need to go. So the decimal form is just 0.8. Now when I want to change a decimal to a percent, what does it say? Move decimal 2 places to the right. Well, I don't have 2 places. Well, what you do is you fill in with a 0. You have to put something there. So it's going to be 80%. Now you can see the difference. If you didn't put that 0 there, that would be 8%, and that's a lot of difference between 8% and 80%. The next problem, we have 17%, and we're going to go from percent to decimal and percent to fraction. All right, so how do you go from percent to decimal? Look on your chart. You move your decimal 2 places to the left. Where's the decimal now? Well, if you don't see a decimal, it's at the end, okay? So to go 2 places to the left with it, that's going to be 0.17. Now, how do you make a fraction? You put the 2 numbers on the top, and now you count how many numbers do you have to the right of a decimal? 1, 2. So you're going to put it over 1 with 2 zeros. Okay, here we go. We have a decimal, 0.090. First, let's change it to a fraction. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to put the number on top. All right, and down here we've got a 1. I need as many zeros as there are numbers past the decimal. Okay, now let's be careful. How many numbers do I have to the right of the decimal? 1, 2, 3, but the 0 at the end is not what we call a significant digit. All right, so we can just get rid of it, and that means all I need here is 2 zeros, okay? So if there are zeros at the end of your decimal, you don't really have to count those, okay? Now, how do you go from a decimal to a percent? Well, you move it 2 places to the right. So this would be 9%. Okay, our next one is we're given the fraction 7/8, and I want to change it to a decimal. So how do you go from fraction to decimal? Well, you just divide. And the bottom number goes on the outside. All right, I have 7, but I'm going to go ahead and put the 2 zeros because I'm going to be prepared to go out to the hundredths. All right, 8 won't go into 7, but it will go into 70. How many times? Well, 8 times 8 is 64. That's as close as I'm going to get without going over. All right, and then we subtract. So this gives us 6. Bring down the 0. Now, how many times will 8 go into 60? Well, that's going to be 7. 7 times 8 is 56. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring down one more so I'll know if I need to round up or down. Okay, if you're rounding to the nearest hundredths, you need to go out one more place if necessary so you can know where to round up from. If it's a 5 or more, you're going to round up. If it's a 5, it's 4 or less, you're going to round, just leave it like it is. Okay, so how many times will 8 go into 40? 5. So this would actually round up to 0.88. Okay, as a decimal, you put 0.88. And as a percent, well, that's going to move over. You're going to move your decimal over 2 places, and that's going to be 88%. Okay, for the next problem, we're given 7%, so we want to change that to a decimal. Well, changing from percent to decimal, you move 2 places to the left, so that's going to be 1, 2. So we're going to have 0.07 for a decimal. Now, how do you do a fraction? Well, you go from decimal. You can either go from decimal or from percent. If you want to go from percent, you put the number over 100 because all percents are number over 100. If I went from the decimal, you got 2 places after the decimal, so you would need 2 zeros. So either way, you get the same answer. Okay, in this next problem, we have the decimal 1.35, and we want to go to fraction and to percent. So how do you go from decimal to fraction? Well, you put the number over 1 and then a 0 for each number past the decimal, to the right of the decimal. So if I put 135 up here, 1, how many zeros do I need? Well, there's 2 numbers to the right of the decimal. So I'm going to put that over 100. Now, that can be reduced down. What will go into both of these? Automatically, you know, 5 will, because this ends in a 5 and this ends in a 0. So if I break it down, how many times will 5? I'm going to divide both of these by 5. Now, the bottom obviously will be 20. 5 will go into 13 twice and bring down the 5, 7. So you have 27 over 20. And you can leave it improper. If you want to make it a mixed number, 20 goes into 27 once. So that would be 1 and 7/20. Okay? Now for a percent, all you do is move your decimal 2 places to the right. So this would be 135%. Now we have a fraction of 1/50. Well, first to change it to a decimal, what do you do from fraction to decimal? You just divide. So I'm going to put 50 into 1. Now I'm going to need some decimal places because it obviously won't go into 1. All right, now I've got my decimal here. 50 won't go into 10, will it? But since this is past the decimal, I have to hold that place. Okay, I can't just move over without it. Now, 0, I'm going to move over to the 100 now. How many times will 50 go into 100? Twice. When I multiply, cancels out. Okay, so our decimal form of 1/50 is 0.02. Now to change it to a percent, you just move the decimal over 2 places, and that gives you 2%. Okay, 205%. So the first thing I want to do, let's change it to a decimal first. How do you go from percent to decimal? You just move your decimal 2 places to the left. Where is it now? It's here. So when I go 2 places to the left, I get 2.05. All right, now how to do it to a fraction? You can either go from here to a fraction, but let's go from percent to fraction. What is percent to fraction? Put the number over 100. So what I'm going to do is 205 over 100. Now I am going to need to reduce that down. I know right off the bat 5 will go into both of them. If I divide both of these numbers by 5, 205 divided by 5 is 41. So I have 41 over 20. So this would be your fraction form in simplest terms. And if you want to make it a mixed number, 20 will go into 41 2 times. 20 times 2 is 40, so you have 1 left over. So mixed number format would be 2 and 1/20. In the next one, we're given the decimal 0.02. So let's go from decimal to fraction. What does it say? Put the number over 1 plus a 0 for each digit. So my number is 2. I'm going to put it over 1. Now, how many numbers past the decimal do I have? How many digits? 1. So it's 2/10, which will reduce down to 1/5. All right, now to go to percent. How do you go from decimal to percent? You move your decimal over 2 places to the right. So since there's nothing there, you have to put a 0 placeholder, so it's going to be 20%. Okay, for this problem, we're given the fraction 3/7. So how do you go to a decimal first? Well, we're going to divide. We're going to say 7 will go into 3 how many times? So we're going to have to add some zeros with a decimal. How many times will 7 go into 30? 4 times. 4 times 7 is 28. And then we'll subtract and bring this 0 down. How many times will 7 go into 20? Well, 2 times. 2 times 7 is 14, and I have a 6 remainder. Now, since I'm wanting to go to my hundredths place, this is where I'm going to add one more 0, and I'm going to bring it down because I need to know, do I round up or do I leave it like it is? If I don't know what the next number is, I don't know what to do. So that's why you have to go out one more place. All right, 7 will go into 68 times. 8 times 7 is 56. And yes, you still have a remainder. You could keep going, but that's all I needed to identify was this number. Since it's an 8, that means I'm going to round up. So my decimal is 0.43, okay? Now, to go to a percent, I can go from here, move my decimal over 2 places, so that's going to give me 43%, okay? Okay, now we have 6.5%. So how do we go from a percent to a decimal? Well, you move your decimal 2 places to the left, first of all, 1, 2. And since there's nothing there, we're going to have to insert a 0. So this would be 0.065 decimal format. Okay, now how about a fraction? Well, you put the percent over 100. So what I have is 6.5 over 100. Now this brings up another problem. You don't ever want to have a decimal in your fraction. That's too much. So what can you do? How can you make a decimal move to the right? Well, you multiply it by 10. And remember, on a fraction, you can do anything you want to as long as you do it to the top and the bottom. So when I multiply 6.5 times 10, that moves the decimal over 1, so now I have 65. And then down here, I have 1,000. Now we just need to reduce it down. 5 will go into both of these. 65 divided by 5 is 13. So this will equal 13 over, and when you take 1,000 and divide it by 5, what do you get? 200. So your fraction form is 13 over 200. You see how your skills are layered? You know, you're having to pull skills from other areas, but they still work. Okay, for this problem, we have 0.25 in the decimal column. So how do you change 0.25? Let's go to percent first, because that's easy. Decimal to percent, you're just moving your decimal 2 places to the right. So that's going to be 25%. Right? Now to go to a fraction, you put the numbers over 1, and then we're going to use a 0 for every digit to the right of the decimal. 1, 2, 1, 2. And obviously this will reduce down. 25 will go into both of these. If you divide 25 by 25, you get 1. If you divide 100 by 25, you get 4. So 1/4 is your fraction form. Okay, so now we have a fraction form of 1 1/5. Before I do anything with that, I am going to change that to an improper fraction so I can turn it to a decimal. So 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. So fraction form of that is 6/5. All right, now to change it to a decimal, your bottom number goes on the outside, and then I'm going to need at least 2 zeros. All right, put your decimal up there. How many times will 5 go into 6? 1 times. 1 times 5 is 5. Subtract and bring down the 0. How many times will 5 go into 10? 2 times. 2 times 5 is 10. So technically, I can stop there, okay? It won't, I mean, it's just going to be 0. So our decimal form is 1.2. See how easy that was? Now I'll go into percent. You just move it over 2 places. So that's going to be 120%. Anytime you have a decimal that has a number to the left of the decimal, your percent is going to be more than 100. And our last one is 1/3 percent. Now everything we had about how to convert was based on where the decimal is. So let's change this to a decimal. We can do that. How do you change a fraction to a decimal? Well, you just divide. So if I do 3 into 1.00, what's that going to give me? Put your decimal here. 3 will go into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. You get another 10. So you got another 3. 1/3 is a repeating decimal. It's just going to go 0.33333333 all the way down. So we can round it off to 0.33. So what we actually have here is 0.33%. Okay? Now, how do you go from a percent to a decimal? You move the decimal 2 places to the left. Well, it's already at the very left end, so what do? You insert some zeros. If I need to go 2 more, I'm going to have to insert zeros, so the decimal form of that would be 0.0033. Now, how do you make a fraction out of that? Well, let's take our decimal format. We're going to put the 2 significant digits, which are 33, over 1. Now, how many zeros do I need? I need a 0 for every number to the right of the decimal. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And just so you don't get confused, there was one where we didn't have to consider the 0. It depends on, is the 0 in between the decimal and the last number, or is it after that? So, for example, if I have 0.057 and I want to make that into a fraction, that's going to be 57 over 1,000. However, if I had 0.570, that would be 57 over 100. The zeros at the very end, if there is nothing else in between, after the 0, then you don't have to count it. All right? And it's because, well, let me show you this. What if I said, all right, this is 570 over, and I counted 1, 2, 3, did 1, 2, 3. What happens here? These 2 zeros divide out. So that's why a 0 at the end of a decimal is not significant. Okay? I will see you back here in just a little while for lesson 7.